Hi, I'm Trevor Stevenson, and welcome to Season 3 of Your Story Will Be Different. This is a narrative play podcast where I tell you the story that came to be from a playthrough of a solo tabletop role-playing game. For this session, we're playing Tangled Blessings by Cassie Mothwin, in which you are enrolled, magically, into a boarding school that has some very deep and dark academia feels to it. It is a solo journaling TTRPG, but you can also play for 1 to 2 people in a co-op session. With that said, let's dive right in. Hartl, why are you having your personal mail delivered here? Hunter wiped the engine grease from his hands and prepared himself for another always informative tirade from Mr. Sarmento. I didn't. Then explain this. In the sweaty, swollen hands of his supervisor, a black and lavender envelope definitely had his name on it and the address of the body shop. Weird. Maybe it's just junk. Handwritten? Nice try. Don't let it happen again. The gold chain around his neck swung wide as he whirled on his heel. Oh, and stop doodling random shit on the invoices. Those aren't free. The fluorescent hum of the garage buzzed in his ears, and he wiped his blackened hands on rags that had seen too many battles. 32 years old and a mechanic by trade, Hunter Hartl was a dreamer by accident. He lived in the same small town for more than a decade, patching up engines and ignoring the itch that sometimes was missing until the envelope arrived. It was not delivered by post. Black as midnight, lined in lavender, the envelope shimmered faintly even under the grease-streaked lights. There was no stamp, no address, just his name in a fine, curling hand. He opened it. The card inside smelled faintly of myrrh and lavender ash. The ink shimmered like oil on water. It read,
Mr. Hartl, your presence is requested at the autumn convocation of Brackroot Academy for the occulted sciences and esoteric arts. Orientation begins under the waning moon. You will know the way. E.
At the bottom, an embossed sigil, a withered tree, its roots curling into a spiral. Hunter shook his head. It should have been absurd. He should have tossed it, laughed it off, or called it just junk mail like he had. And normally he would have, if it hadn't been that weeks earlier he had begun dreaming of a gem that whispered in a voice older than the mountains. In his dreams, a stone stood alone in a forest clearing. It called itself the Speaking Gem. Every night, it returned with new secrets, the names of forgotten elements, equations behind the invisible forces of reality, visions of a life he thought was pure fiction. None of the secrets made sense to him, but they stayed with him for hours after each dream. He didn't even leave a note before he left for the academy. The path to Brackroot wasn't on any map, but the letter was right. He knew the way. Through a hollow underpass in a city he didn't recognize, down a road slick with fog and silence, past a gate that opened without a key, but seemingly at the whim of his foggy breath. And then it was there, like a common fact like gravity. Brackroot Academy rose from the mist like a cathedral built by bones. Its looming angles made no Euclidean sense, with towers that leaned towards the moon and a central spire shaped like a needle piercing the sky. After a moment of admittedly gaping, Hunter began to notice others moving in the lifting fog. Students were gathering in the courtyard beneath the iron sky, but he was surprised by their diversity. Not just ethnically, but some were young, barely out of undergrad. Others looked older than the professors. The mingled scent of old parchment and garden loam carried on the breeze from the buildings in front of them. They were ushered towards a courtyard of black stone where a woman with a shawl of living moths stood by a pedestal ringed in moss.
Welcome, initiates, to Brackroot Academy. I am Headmistress Elvira Dinkler. I'm pleased you received my letter and had the courage to follow your own curiosity. You will be well rewarded for it here. Here, you will study wonders the world has forgotten and horrors it never wished to know. You arrive from many walks of life, many times of life, but now you share a single path, one that demands discipline, courage, and above all, clarity of purpose. You will be sorted shortly, not for your comfort, but for compatibility with the forces that reside here. The house you enter may not be the one you want. It will be the one that sees you for what you are and will help you grow into who you're meant to be. Some of you will strive. A few may falter. All of you will be changed. Remember, the school does not grant you power. It reveals whether you were meant to hold it. Proceed to the sorting.
Headmistress Elvira gestured for the new students to approach the pedestal next to her, where, without meaning to, Hunter found himself first in line. But someone pushed him aside and stepped ahead of him. She was in her early 40s, with a composure like a predator ready to pounce. The headmistress looked at her with something between annoyance and intrigue.
Name?
Hillary Lucas.
Without hesitation, she placed her hand on the stone pedestal with a determination that made the moths stir.
House of Dahlias, marked by creativity, perfectionism, and a touch of obsession.
A greenhouse door swung open nearby, revealing orchids that breathed mist and vines that twitched when stared at too long. Hillary gave Hunter the faintest smirk as she walked past. He was surprised how much it chafed him. But it was his turn next. He stepped forward, laid his hand on the stone, and it felt as cold as anything he had ever touched.
House of Panthers, known for observation, punctuality, and ruthlessness.
A black path unfurled toward the forest's edge, past trees that watched and shadows that breathed a haunting welcome. Hunter stared after Hillary, who had disappeared into the garden's glow. He exhaled slowly. He hadn't known it when he arrived, but he did now. This wasn't a school. It was a crucible, and she was his first test. By the end of his first week, Hunter Hartl had accepted the impossible as humdrum. The hallways of Brackroot Academy shifted when no one looked. Blink and they would be different sizes, or have textures and artwork that he never noticed. There were other oddities. The sky above the western tower sometimes pulsed like a heartbeat. Students whispered in tongues that weren't on the curriculum. Between the lectures on phantasmal taxonomy and the grueling hours spent deciphering handwritten grimoires, the otherworldly began to feel routine. His first potion-making assignment, however, shook him out of complacency. The task was a simple one: brew a tonic for temporary aesthetic change. Most students reached for petal-infused dyes, dew from glasswing lilies, or shimmer root from the greenhouse. Hunter was irrationally frustrated, uninspired, and irritable. He separated himself from his classmates and wandered to the edge of the forest. He ignored the brambles that watched him and closed his mind to the wind that sometimes muttered. But he felt a jet black gaze on him and looked around to see who had followed him. He saw no one behind him. He was alone, but the feeling continued. With a warble, a raven bigger than he'd ever seen revealed itself. It perched on a branch, staring down at him with one beady eye. It squawked, hopped down, and began to march towards the forest's shadowy fringe. It paused every few steps to look back at him. He knew something this ominous shouldn't be his guide, but Hunter followed anyway. The raven led him through a path barely visible, past trees that leaned too close, and flowers that glowed faintly under the canopy. It stopped by a clearing where a cluster of strange ingredients grew. Star-tipped mushrooms, a root that bled light when cut, and berries with a shimmer like obsidian. Hunter kneeled down to examine the little microcosm of the forest floor. After a moment, the realization dawned on him. Symbiosis in nature might be the key to the ingredients for his potion as well. Back in his room, Hunter pored over the last pages of his battered textbook. Annotations in the margins hinted these oddities were safe in small doses and potent when combined. He brewed a potion and tested it on himself. His irises began to ignite faintly. It revealed hidden things in the darkness. It didn't just change appearance, it granted extra sight. The instructor took one look at the results and marked it with a rare seal of distinction, something that meant that it would be reviewed by the professors. Not everyone in his class was impressed. Later that semester, in alchemy class, Hunter was paired with a tall, aloof student named Drath Etas, one of 3 identical siblings who seemed to share a single soul between them. Their project was to present a magically enchanted clothing. Warding robes, illusion-shifting scarves, cloaks that stitched themselves together. Hunter contributed heavily to the research, spending late nights refining diagrams and spell threads. The day that they presented, word spread like rot among the in-crowds of the school. Drath had told the class that Hunter hadn't done any of the work, and in a school ruled by reputation and subtle alliances, it didn't take long for the others to believe him. For weeks, Hunter ate alone. The dorm halls grew quieter when he passed through, and the coup de grace was Hilary Lucas and her cool smile of satisfaction. The alchemy professor, Professor Deepwell, sensed the tension in the student body and gave Hunter a choice: accept a failing grade for the project or deliver a solo presentation on a related subject. Hunter chose to fight. His nights became focused solely on intense research, borrowing books from the restricted stacks and studying protective sigils etched into fading grave markers. On the day of the presentation, he stood before the class and unveiled a full conceptual design. Ornate jewelry, repurposed not only to protect the wearer from hexes, but stored traces of psychic harm to be studied and neutralized later. Even Drath had to applaud. Quietly. As the year deepened into rain and frost, so did the lessons. The divination professor, who was a translucent woman known only as Madame Scree, assigned each student a final project: seek their familiar. In typical fashion, Hunter spent weeks consulting arcane tomes, dream diaries, and the odd message board hidden behind layers of magical captcha. He even turned to obscure children's stories hoping for a moment of inspiration. Nothing surfaced. He began to feel the pressure that he would fall behind his peers, who had found their familiars almost too easily. One stormy night, lightning flicked across the dorm windows as he paced the library's mezzanine. Downstairs, the hearth was dead. Not another soul living or not, was within earshot. Then came the clicking of claws on stone. A brindle-colored greyhound stepped out of the shadows. Its 6 eyes locked on him, the 3 heads turning in curiosity. And then he heard its voice like an echo of a forbidden secret.
I've been watching you.
Instead of fear, Hunter felt something comforting. Its presence washed over him as if it were a fond memory he had forgotten.
What should I call you?
I have many names, but we may choose one together.
After some back and forth, the dog and Hunter settled on the name Argus. Their pact was simple. Argus would roam free, a guardian that was bound by mutual respect but not obedience. In return, he would lend Hunter insight and whispers of intuition, especially when it came to keeping one step ahead of Hillary Lucas, who had already begun to charm her professors and outperform the rest of the Dahlias. As the year ended and the sorting stone grew cold for summer, Hunter stood in the forest where he had first seen the raven. The trees watched as he and Argus walked underneath their boughs. He had survived this first year at Brackroot, but survival alone wasn't the goal. Momentum was. When the gates of Brackroot closed behind him that spring, Hartl felt a loss like a pulled tooth. It was dull, persistent, and it was impossible not to probe. The mundane, regular world moved on without magic. Oil changes, wrench sets, rent, the dull rattle of the fan in his apartment window. Gone were the whispering hallways and enigmatic professors, the potion smoke and moonlit lectures. Without Brackroot, the world felt shallow. His days were literally brighter, but felt flat. Argus had vanished too, though not entirely. Sometimes just out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shape. Brindled fur, 3 heads turning as one, but when he turned his head, there was nothing. He tried to push the year from his mind, but it clung to him. One night, with a high ABV beer in his hand, Hunter cracked open the old laptop he barely used anymore. Just out of curiosity, he typed in names. Some of his classmates led unremarkable digital lives. Tax records, family obituaries, the occasional post about a beloved dog or failed marriage. Some, like him, had almost nothing online. But then there was Hillary Lucas. She had a sleek, curated presence. No trace of her time at Brackroot, of course. The only life she wanted others to see. Elegant, balanced, perfect. A wine glass in one hand, a new recipe in the other. Her kitchen was spotless. Her light curated and divine. Hunter stared at the screen and didn't like how it made him feel. It wasn't envy, exactly. It was irritation. That she was still perfect. That she looked like she was always winning. That night, he resolved to become a better cook than her. Not for applause, not for followers, just because. At first, it was awkward. A few charred vegetables, rice was too wet sometimes, but then something clicked, or maybe shifted inside him. His knife never dulled. His portions were always exact, and cleanup was strangely easy. He never burned anything. A new cuisine came naturally. Thai, French, Mongolian, Appalachian, all of it poured from his hands like a second language he didn't know he already spoke. He began cooking for friends, co-workers, once a neighbor he barely knew. Every dish was met with warmth and surprise. One of his fellow mechanics even joked,
"Did you kidnap a chef and hide him in your fridge or something?"
Hunter just smiled. It was a subtle, intrinsic magic. Maybe not even magic at all. Maybe it was just luck. But it felt like his. A quiet power. A win. one Hillary never knew he'd claimed. He returned to Brackroot that fall with a new chef's knife packed along his books. Argus greeted him on the arrival platform with a low growl and a knowing smirk on 3 sets of jaws. Hunter grinned and tossed his familiar 3 homemade treats while he still savored his quiet victory. But he had no idea how dark his sophomore year would be. The first month came with cold rains and a strange urge lingering from his summer break. He was going to prove himself, not to the professors, not even to his boorish classmates like Drath, not even to Hillary Lucas, but to the school itself. He now felt the academy was testing him, waiting to see who would flinch first. He decided to attempt his first solo ritual as an independent study project. 12 hours of chanting, non-stop. Candles placed in a circle of iron powder and salt. The ritual was meant to open a gate, not to somewhere, but to someone. The grimoire he had found in the library had told him to speak with the dead, the instructions said. Do not falter, do not blink. At hour 11, the candle flames burned blue. At hour 12, the air snapped, painfully cold. He rubbed his frigid hands to fight the hurt, and his chant turned into small clouds in front of his face. She appeared in a sudden blink, as if she'd always been there. A stern woman in a tightly laced Victorian garb, every hair in place, eyes like knives stabbing him. She didn't move so much as materialize.
I am Headmistress Abatha Claw. You should not have summoned me.
Hunter stammered an apology, but she raised a gloved hand.
I do not resent your curiosity, only your ignorance.
She silently stepped closer, eyes gleaming like wet ink in the blue candlelight.
Did you really think the dead speak only truth? The dead can lie too. That's what makes them dangerous.
And then she was gone. In midwinter, the Central Library was gripped by chaos. Hunter had gone to return a reference text on elemental channeling when he heard shouting from the lower floors. He arrived just in time to see his favorite professor being dragged across the library by Brackroot's security detail. Professor Vale was a calm, sharp-eyed scholar of ancient magical architecture, so it was alarming to see him thrown about by the security force with such animosity. Students whispered and watched as Vale was shoved through the iron doorways, his long coat snagged on a bookcase. Hunter shouted after him, demanding an explanation from either him or the security detail. One of the officers sneered. Your instructor was consorting with an insurgent organization. His tenure is revoked, and he will have all knowledge of Brackroot resected. Before the door shut, Vale locked eyes with Hunter and pressed something into his palm. When the crowd dispersed, Hunter hid in the east wing of the library, making sure that no one saw him when he opened his hand. It was a deceptively small, sealed chest, smooth, clearly ancient, and marked with a glyph he didn't recognize from any of his studies so far. He turned it over in his hand, and then he turned it over in his hand again. On the third turn, the seal dissolved beneath his thumb into mist. Inside, he found a compass, arcane and covered in ornate glyphs. The needle spun madly before settling, not on north, but on somewhere else, somewhere near. He didn't know what it pointed to, but it was positive that Professor Vale had meant to give it to him. In February, fire tore through the greenhouses. Hunter had been walking toward the campus gardens when he saw it. A violent flicker, then a column of smoke. One of the greenhouses was ablaze, and glass exploded out like shrapnel. He was already in motion before he realized his reaction. Summoning the weather from somewhere inside himself, he pulled the clouds low. Rain lashed the flames and steam filled the air. When it was over, half the greenhouse was gone. And unfortunately with it, Brackroot's supply of restorative herbs. In the day that followed, panic filled every hall and dormitory of the academy. Without those herbs, regular and magical injuries could no longer be easily healed. Illness would linger. Death now had teeth again at the academy. And yet no culprit came to the surface, so Hunter took it on himself to find one. Samuel Stain was a third year. He had a reputation for being frequently moody, often was seen with ink under his fingernails and bruises he wouldn't explain. Hunter cornered him by an old well outside the library.
I didn't mean to! I was just trying to destroy the letters. The ones from her. I didn't know the fire would spread, and the paniculata was explosive.
You would have known that if you paid attention in class. People could have died, Samuel.
I know. Please don't tell them. You know what they do to people who cross the academy.
Hunter hesitated, weighed his options, and then slowly nodded. That night, the dreams returned. From then on, night after night, the speaking stone returned to his mind and called to him. Its voice filled his sleep, threading through his bones like static. Visions of a path no one else could see, and visions of darkness, of questions with no answers. One night, he tried to stay awake to keep the dreams at bay, but eventually he succumbed. He was already halfway to the forest when he woke up. Hunter had followed the dream path out of his dorm and into the forest. The trees seemed to lean in, blotting out the stars. He continued on in silence. And then, from deep within him, panic welled up. He turned, and the trail behind him was gone. There was a humming in the forest now. Shadows now moved with purpose. But just as fear cracked open his chest, his pocket buzzed. He checked his phone. That wasn't it. There was no signal here. The buzz came again, and he realized it was the compass in his other pocket. It vibrated faintly in his hand, the needle glowing faintly blue. It pointed towards a path that he was positive wasn't there before. As it was his only option, he moved forward. In a grove cut from time, he found it. It was a massive black crystal that pulsed like a heart when he approached. It looked exactly like it had in his dreams. He had the same feeling that he wasn't alone, but this time he clearly saw the other person. Hilary Lucas stood on the other side of the clearing, sharing the same confused look he did. Their eyes met, and they stepped towards each other. As if choreographed, they placed their hands on the stone at the exact same time. And then the world fell away. There was no forest, no air. Hunter was floating in a vacuum of stars and nebulae. Then he was enveloped by a single haunting voice.
The next step towards your final test is hidden in the Grand Rotunda.
And with a lurch, they were back. After they picked themselves off the forest floor, they sat in silence for a while. The speaking gems seemed to have gone inert for now, the humming having stopped. Hunter and Hilary were both deep in thought as they made their way south across campus. But there was still that air of mistrust between them. They were always keeping each other in sight and at arm's length. Atop the plateau, the Grand Rotunda awaited. It was a vast, circular temple carved from pale obsidian, older than the Academy itself. Some believed that the Academy had been built to honor the Rotunda. Inside, they found only a thick silence and 2 chalices. One shimmered silver, glowing softly in the moonlight. The other was scorched black, burned and cracked, as if it was immune to light. Neither of them budged at first, waiting for the other to make their move. Eventually, Hillary snorted in frustration and picked up the silver chalice. Hunter took its dark twin. Begrudgingly, they raised them both in toast. To the end of the year.
To what comes next.
We'll go ahead and leave the story there, and we will conclude next time.
This episode featured the vocal talents of Allison Hill, Kris Carr, Karen Michelle, Aaron Mills, John Pearson, and Emily Valdes.
A very special thank you to my friends at Speak Friends Studio for lending their skills training and coordinating these amazing vocal talents for the episode. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can learn all that they do. Thank you for listening to Your Story Will Be Different. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of the episodes from previous seasons, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review on your podcatcher of choice. As always, I'll leave a link in the show notes to Tangled Blessings by Cassie Mothwin. And be sure to reach out on social media to let me know how your school years at Brackroot Academy go. But just remember, your story will be different.